Laptop computer spins onto the screen, opens, and displays ATP Education Program webinar series, closes, and then spins off the screen.
Welcome to part 6 of Adoption versus Abandonment. In this section, we are going to talk about data collection and use that to apply to the powers we have to nudge students towards adopting their technology versus abandoning it. Once again, I am Sayard Bass, and I will be walking you through this next module. So in our 6th section, we are going to discuss data collection, and the objectives that I would like you to kind of leave with are to first name the 4 competencies that demonstrate student skills, and second, give one example of subjective versus objective data collection. Now, when we're talking about data collection, we know that this is key in the education world. If we can't back up or show changes in what a student is doing, usually through numbers or through test scores or through progress, then it didn't happen. So we need to make sure that we are finding ways to show that assistive technology is working. So at the outset, the team needs to decide what data to collect, who is going to collect it, and remember that always goes back to you can't just have one team member in charge of everything, and when will you review that data. It's something that should likely be done more than once a year at the IEP. So one thing I like to highlight when discussing data collection is the 4 competencies or the 4 key skills all students will need. We know that we can put the assistive technology in front of them, just like water in front of a horse, but can we make them use it? The competencies to which I'm referring are operational, social, strategic, and functional. This all comes from some research that was done by Zabala, Bowser, and Corsten in 2004 and 5, which was adopted from earlier work by Light and Buchelman and Reichel in 2003. So this comes from the research of communication competence and has made a really nice transfer over into assistive technology competence as well. First off, we have the operational competence. I sometimes refer to this as, do you know how to turn it on, plug it in, and make all the buttons work? So this is where a lot of our learning curve might occur at first for our students. I do like that they differentiate. There's a difference between knowing how to just turn it on and being able to use the tool effectively. So operationally, can the student manage it and get it turned on? I've had students who, especially with iPads, have difficulty with getting those small chargers into the ports, as well as pulling them out. I've had students where they are great with a device once it's set up, but getting it out of the bag is difficult. So all of those things need to be considered, and they can also be used as benchmarks as to progress that's being made. Next is that functional competency, and this is if the student can use the AT for the task that it was given to them for. And I think the iPad is a great example of this. We can give a student an iPad, and there are probably things they can do on there. I've seen kids as young as 2 and 3 able to pull up a YouTube video that they really like, or able to get into photos, take pictures. Yet if we were going to use that device or the iPad for any type of assistive technology, would they functionally be able to do that as well? Many times I'll have team members say, well, maybe we can give him an iPad. And it's true that the student might be able to use the iPad to play games, but are they functionally able or ready to use that iPad for a different task such as assistive technology? Strategic is the next competency, and that's saying, can they use it in the real world on real world tasks? We might have a student who's very used to using a device when it comes to a certain assignment, a certain class, when they are set up or cued by an adult, but can they have that realization, that moment themselves of saying, oh my gosh, you know what? This is what my device is for. I can pull it out and use it to do this activity as well. So this is where students are seeing beyond what the prescribed and expected use of a device is and using it appropriately in another setting. This is also a really great transfer skill for those students who are leaving us after high school and going on to college, because at that point, it's going to take some initiation on the student's part to set up and use their assistive technology. They need to get to this strategic point. If a student goes somewhere else, such as a job site or a trade school, they also will need this skill, because even though there are supports that are given to adults on job training, if they don't reach this strategic point, is the assistive technology really helping them to become more independent in their access to the environment? And social is the last competency, and that's kind of giving the student some of those soft skills that are difficult to teach but very important when it comes to self-determination, when it comes to self-advocacy, when it comes to the student being able to not only use the tool in multiple situations, but be able to describe how and why they are using it. This is where often, if I'm working with a student to expand this competency, I might sit down and have a little bit of a setup interview, or I might ask them to teach me how to use it or explain why they use it. This might not seem like a huge data point, but even getting the student to write up a self-advocacy statement that involves their assistive technology can go a long way towards building their social competency. And it's great evidence to present and works really well in an IEP meeting. Then we come to more traditional data collection. I remember in graduate school, we had a professor who said, you need to make sure that you're taking data during every speech session, even if you have to write it on the wall or the ceiling, use a clicker, have your pluses, minuses, check boxes, but you need to have some data to prove what the student is doing. When working with some types of therapy, using that plus and minus is perfect. It's like, okay, was that a good S or not such a great S? When it comes to assistive technology, using that pluses and minuses can almost become cumbersome because it's not something that's going to happen in 100% of situations consistently or the same throughout different lessons or days or projects. So I like to split it into two types of data. First off, that objective data. You can take something where you say, did the student use it? Did it come out of the backpack? Were they able to pull it out without me telling them to get it out? You also can get some really great objective data through certain programs. If you're using AAC, certain products do align well with realized language. Others have some really great data tracking built in. Learning Ally, which is a program for reading, can help track pages read. Don Johnston products and even Google Docs can give you information about when a user got in and made changes and what changes they made. This all can be really great ways to get that objective plus minus, I've got a percentage for you data. Though we also can use something like grades. We can say, okay, we saw this student, he was getting, 60% with a paraprofessional helping him out to try and organize his writing. He started using assistive technology. Remember, we've got a learning curve. If we aren't accommodating for it ahead of time, we might see a drop to, 45, 50%. But then we see the student come up to 70, 80%. So using those grades can be a great way to track that data objectively, and it keeps you from having to do the gymnastics of plus minus and kind of artificially manufacturing situations to get information on a student. You also can take a look at their use of accommodations. Assistive technology is an accommodation with stuff. That's my basic way of explaining it to people sometimes is I'm just using stuff instead of people. I'm using stuff instead of an accommodation in the classroom. So you can track if there is assistive technology which is replacing a person or something else in the classroom, you can see how that balance changes. For example, if a student's using a scribe or a human note taker or a human reader, we can see how is this decreasing over time as the student becomes more proficient in their assistive technology use. This can be difficult because learned helplessness can play a lot into that, though if we empower the student to show them how they can do it independently, hopefully we can find a way to track that accommodation usage and see objectively that the student is becoming more independent through the use of technology. But never discount the power of subjective data. When we have a student who is teetering on that edge between am I going to use this technology which was given to me versus am I not going to use this technology, there is a lot of subjective that goes into it, especially those decisions that can push a student towards abandoning technology. So subjectively, when I check in with a student, I want to know, hey, are you using it? Even if the teacher already told me they absolutely never take it out of their bag, I want to see what the student says. I've had students where I might get subjectively that the student says they're using it. No one's seen it out at school, but we have objective data from the back end showing that they are using it at home. So it's always important to kind of let them tell you their story. Ask them what they think of it. It may be that when a student first gets a device, they tell you that they think it sucks. There comes that phrase again. And over time, maybe you can document that the student has shown that they think it sucks less or sucks more. Really incorporating this phrase a lot, though that is important data when it comes to the ideas of adoption of technology. Changes in behavior can also be important. I did share an office with some BCBAs, and it was really a fascinating thing to combine with assistive technology. When we saw students gaining more independence and gaining more skills, we did see some decreases in behavior. I'd love to go back and track that a little more solidly, though especially work refusal. Once a student learns how to do something more independently and they have confidence in their technology, it's a great thing to track. Though if we see the opposite, where a student all of a sudden is not turning in work, we also need to be aware of that so we can hopefully steer away from abandonment. And finally, there's something that really only the student can tell us. Does the work feel easier or harder with their technology? And at different parts of the learning process with a new technology, they might be answering the majority one way or the other. If over time they feel things are hard and they're continually rating them as hard, maybe we didn't make the right match. Maybe we need to try something else. Though typically I think we'd see something get hard, maybe a little harder, and then start to get easier in the long term. So I always say my subjective data is judgment-free. If I think the student's reporting to me accurately, I might make a note of that. If I think the student's kind of like, okay, I'm going to make Miss Bass happy, that's cool too, but I'll make a note of it and say, I think the student's really not into this because what I've heard reported from staff subjectively is not matching with what I'm seeing. So what do we do with the data? We take it to the IEP meeting. We send it to the parents. Maybe we even share it with teachers. If we see a student is really into using their text-to-speech in world history class, but they might not be using it in English, it's great to have that data so you can go between and maybe help the teachers compare, figure out what's going on differently within those environments. When we have our data written down, I found Google Sheets is a really fun way to get some nice pretty graphs. If you can bring a graph to an IEP meeting, I think that that's almost as important as your pen to sign because it looks great. In Google Sheets, there's a nice green Explore button at the bottom that will even show you what types of graph you can make with the data that you've taken. So what I'd like you to do as a bonus activity to really kind of embrace these objectives from this section is to create a data sheet that has both a subjective and an objective component. Now make sure that you're not making that objective component so complex that no one's going to want to pick up that data sheet, or they're going to pick it up and kind of check it off at the end of the day. And then share that with a coworker and get their feedback on how that would function for them during the school day. Is this something that's going to be easy to fill out, something that's going to be needlessly complicated or consistently forgotten? Just like when we ask student opinions, I want staff to be honest with me. Are you going to use this data sheet? Because if we're not taking the data, we can't really prove in one way or another that something's working or not working until it's either sitting on the shelf or extremely successful for the student. So hopefully, by figuring out how to create and take our own data, we can create sheets that really give us quality information on the students and can help us identify when changes are being made or when we might need to tweak our approach or equipment a little more. And that ends section 6.
Thank you for watching. For more information on the ATP Education Program, please visit our website at atp.nebraska.gov/education or email us at atp.education@nebraska.gov.